Sarah Mitchell had waited 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days for this moment. She knew because she'd counted every single one of them. Standing in the nursery, she'd painted soft yellow with trembling hands. She held her daughter for the first time and felt something inside her chest break open in the most beautiful way possible. The baby was so small, barely 7 pounds, with a dusting of dark hair and the tiniest fingers Sarah had ever seen. When those little fingers wrapped around Sarah's thumb, she felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. This was Emma. Her Emma. After all the paperwork, the home visits, the interviews, the waiting, and the praying, her daughter was finally here. The adoption agency had called just 2 weeks earlier. Sarah remembered exactly where she'd been standing when her phone rang, right by the kitchen window watching rain streak down the glass. The social worker's voice had been professional but warm. A birth mother had chosen Sarah's profile. Everything was moving forward. Could Sarah be ready in 2 weeks? Sarah would have been ready in 2 hours if they'd asked. Now, walking around the quiet nursery with Emma nestled against her chest, Sarah hummed softly and tried to memorize everything about this moment. The weight of her daughter in her arms, the sweet, clean smell of her skin, the tiny sounds she made while sleeping. At 32, Sarah had almost given up on becoming a mother. Her marriage had ended 5 years ago, and with it had gone her dreams of having children the traditional way. But holding Emma now, she knew this was exactly how it was meant to happen. The baby came with very little. A car seat, a small bag with a few outfits, and a soft pink blanket that had clearly been handmade. Sarah had been told the birth mother wanted a closed adoption with no contact, which wasn't unusual. Still, something about that blanket touched her heart. Someone had taken the time to knit this, stitch by careful stitch. Someone had loved this baby before Sarah ever held her. That first night was magical and terrifying in equal measure. Emma woke every 2 hours, and Sarah stumbled through feedings with shaking hands, constantly worried she was doing everything wrong. But as the sun rose and she sat in the rocking chair with Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, Sarah felt a certainty settle over her. She could do this. She would do this. This little girl was worth everything. The first week passed in a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Sarah's mother came to stay and helped with the endless laundry and cooking, while Sarah focused on bonding with Emma. Her best friend Rachel stopped by almost daily with groceries and encouragement. Everyone who met Emma fell instantly in love, and Sarah's heart swelled with pride every time someone told her how beautiful her daughter was. It was during the second week, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, that Sarah decided to wash all of Emma's things properly. She'd been using the blanket constantly, and it needed a good cleaning. As she carefully unfolded it to check for any damage, she felt something unusual in the hem. A slight thickness that didn't match the rest of the fabric. Curious, Sarah examined it more closely and found what looked like a small seam that had been hand-stitched, different from the machine-made edges of the blanket. Her nurse's hands, used to noticing small details, carefully worked at the stitching until it came loose. Inside was a tiny pocket, and inside that pocket was a piece of paper folded so small it was barely larger than a postage stamp. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The paper was thin, the kind torn from a regular notebook, and the handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. As she read the words, her blood ran cold. Please protect her. Her father is Richard Thornton. He can never know she exists.
He's dangerous.
I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. Sarah read it 3 times, each time hoping she'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. Richard Thornton. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. He was one of the richest men in the country, a tech billionaire whose face appeared regularly in business magazines and news programs. He ran charitable foundations, donated millions to causes around the world, and was generally considered one of the good guys in the often criticized tech industry. And according to this note, he was Emma's father. And he was dangerous. Sarah sank into a chair, the note trembling in her hand. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was this real? Could it be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding? But the desperation in those words felt genuine. The mother had sewn this note into the blanket, hidden it carefully, took the time to warn whoever received her baby. That wasn't the action of someone being dramatic. That was the action of someone truly afraid. She looked over at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, completely unaware of the storm that might be gathering around her small life. Sarah felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. Whatever this meant, whatever danger might exist, she would keep her daughter safe. That was a promise she made right then and there. But what should she do with this information? Going to the police seemed premature without knowing more. The adoption had been legal and properly handled through a licensed agency. She couldn't just throw around accusations about one of the most powerful men in the country, based on a hidden note. But she also couldn't ignore it. That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept picking up her phone, reading articles about Richard Thornton. His public image was impeccable. Married to a prominent attorney, 2 teenage children, homes in 3 states. He spoke at conferences about ethical business practices and the responsibility of wealth. Nothing in his public persona suggested danger or scandal. But Sarah knew from her years working in emergency rooms that people often had hidden sides. She'd seen too many cases where charming, successful people revealed themselves capable of terrible things behind closed doors. The note writer, this woman identified only as M, had been desperate enough to hide a warning in her baby's blanket. That meant something. By morning, Sarah had made a decision. She needed to know more, but she needed to be careful about it. She couldn't risk Emma's safety or her adoption by making reckless accusations. She needed someone who knew how to investigate quietly. Someone who understood how powerful people operated and how to dig for truth without drawing attention. She thought of Marcus Chen, a private investigator who'd helped a friend track down a biological parent a few years earlier. He'd been thorough, discreet, and kind. More importantly, he'd been a journalist before becoming an investigator, which meant he knew how to research powerful people and find information others might miss. Sarah called him that afternoon while Emma napped. She explained the situation carefully, reading him the note word for word. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You understand what you're asking me to investigate here," Marcus said finally, his voice serious. "Richard Thornton has resources most people can't imagine. If there's really something there, it won't be easy to find. And if there isn't, we could be stirring up problems for nothing." "I know," Sarah said quietly, "but I can't ignore this. If Emma's in any kind of danger, I need to know. And if her birth mother was scared enough to leave this warning, she deserves to have someone take it seriously." Marcus was quiet for another moment. Then she heard him exhale. "All right. Send me everything you have. I'll start looking into it quietly. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. We might not like what we find, or we might find nothing at all." "I understand," Sarah said, looking at Emma sleeping in her bassinet, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. "I just need to know the truth." After hanging up, Sarah carefully photographed the note from every angle, then tucked it away in her fireproof safe along with Emma's adoption papers and birth certificate. She had no idea what Marcus might find or where this investigation might lead, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. No one was going to hurt her daughter. Not while she had breath in her body. 2 weeks passed before Marcus called again. 2 weeks during which Sarah tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, while her mind constantly returned to that hidden note. She went through the motions of new motherhood, attending a first pediatrician appointment, taking Emma for walks in the stroller, accepting visits from friends who brought casseroles and baby clothes. But underneath everything was a current of anxiety she couldn't quite shake. Emma was thriving. She'd gained weight. Her eyes were starting to focus on Sarah's face, and she'd begun making small cooing sounds that made Sarah's heart melt. Every time she looked at her daughter, Sarah felt that fierce love mixed with fear. What kind of world had she brought this child into? What secrets were lurking in Emma's past? When Marcus finally did call, Sarah was folding laundry with one hand while rocking Emma's bouncer with her foot. She snatched up the phone on the first ring. "I found something," Marcus said without preamble. "Can we meet?" This isn't a conversation for the phone. They met at a quiet coffee shop the next morning. Sarah's mother had agreed to watch Emma, though Sarah hadn't explained why she needed the time. Marcus was already waiting at a corner table when she arrived, a thick folder in front of him and concern evident in his expression. "Before I show you this," he said as Sarah sat down, "I want you to know I've been doing this kind of work for 15 years. I've investigated a lot of people, seen a lot of things. What I found here troubles me." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Just tell me." Marcus opened the folder and pulled out several printed pages. Richard Thornton's public image is carefully managed, as you'd expect. But when you dig deeper, There are patterns that don't add up. I found 3 women who used to work for his companies who left under unusual circumstances. All 3 signed extensive non-disclosure agreements. All 3 received financial settlements, and all 3 seemed to have essentially disappeared from their professional lives afterward. He slid the pages across to her. They showed names, dates, brief employment histories. Sarah scanned them, her heart sinking with each line. I tried to contact all 3, Marcus continued. 2 wouldn't speak to me at all. The third, a woman named Jennifer Park, agreed to a very brief, very off-the-record conversation. She wouldn't give me details, but she said if I was investigating Thornton about his treatment of women, I was on the right track. She said he was charming at first, but when things ended, he became someone completely different. Did she say anything about violence? Sarah asked quietly. She wouldn't use that word specifically, but she said she'd been scared. Scared enough to take the money and sign away her right to ever speak about what happened. She said the harassment stopped only after she signed the NDA and moved to another state. Sarah felt sick. 3 women. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. And those are just the ones I could find with a couple weeks of digging. There could be more. Marcus pulled out another document. I also looked into the adoption agency that handled Emma's placement. They received a substantial anonymous donation about a month before your case was approved. $50,000, wired through a series of accounts that made it very difficult to trace. You think it was him? Thornton. I can't prove it, but the timing is suspicious. If Emma's birth mother was connected to him and wanted to hide the baby, she might have needed to ensure the adoption went through quickly and quietly. A donation like that could expedite things, make sure the right profiles got seen. Sarah sat back, trying to process everything. So what you're telling me is that the note might be real. Emma's birth mother might have had good reason to be afraid. That's what I'm saying, Marcus confirmed gently. And Sarah, I think we need to find her. The birth mother. She's the only one who can tell us what really happened and what kind of danger we're actually looking at. The adoption was closed. I don't have any information about her, but the agency does, and I have some contacts who might be able to help us track her down, though it won't be easy or necessarily legal. Marcus leaned forward. The question is, do you want to go down this road? Once we start pulling at these threads, we can't put them back. And if Thornton finds out someone's investigating him, he has the resources to make life very difficult. Sarah thought about Emma, about the note sewn into her blanket, about a woman desperate enough to hide her baby from the father. She thought about 3 other women who'd been scared into silence. She thought about what kind of mother she wanted to be, what kind of example she wanted to set. Find her, Sarah said firmly. I need to know the truth. The next week felt like the longest of Sarah's life. She went through her days in a fog of worry, constantly checking her phone for updates from Marcus. She found herself watching the news differently now, paying attention when Thornton's name came up, studying his face for signs of the danger the note had warned about. He looked so normal, so polished and professional. It was hard to reconcile that image with the picture Marcus had painted. Emma turned 2 months old. Sarah celebrated with a small gathering of close friends, forcing smiles and accepting congratulations while her mind churned with questions. Rachel, her best friend, pulled her aside at one point. Are you okay? Rachel asked. You seem distracted. Is everything all right with Emma? Emma's perfect, Sarah said, which was true. I'm just tired. New mom exhaustion, you know? Rachel didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Sarah felt guilty for not being honest, but what could she say? That she was investigating a billionaire who might be her daughter's father? That she was worried they might be in danger? It sounded insane even in her own head. Marcus called on a Wednesday evening. I found her, he said. Or at least I'm pretty sure I did. A woman named Michelle Torres. She worked as a software engineer for Thornton Industries about 2 years ago. Left the company suddenly, dropped off the grid for a while. The timeline matches up with Emma's birth. Sarah's heart pounded. Where is she? That's the tricky part. She's living in Arizona under a different name. Took me a while to track her down through her sister. Sarah, she's scared. When my contact mentioned anything related to Thornton or the baby, she shut down completely. She needs to know Emma's safe, Sarah said. She needs to know someone took her warning seriously. I thought you might say that. I can try to set up a meeting, but it has to be on her terms, somewhere she feels safe. And Sarah, you need to be prepared that she might not want to be found. She gave up her baby for a reason. I know, Sarah said softly, but she also left that note. Part of her wanted someone to know, to understand. Maybe she needs to know that someone does. It took another week of careful negotiation through intermediaries before Michelle agreed to meet. She chose a public library in a town between their two locations, 3 hours from where Sarah lived. She would only agree to meet Sarah alone. No investigators, no lawyers. Just two mothers trying to understand what had happened. Sarah's mother agreed to watch Emma for the day, though Sarah could see the worry in her eyes. "Are you sure this is safe?" her mother asked. "I have to do this, Mom," Sarah replied. "For Emma's sake. I need to understand what we're dealing with." The drive felt endless. Sarah rehearsed what she would say, how she would approach this woman who had given birth to Emma and then given her away. She tried to imagine what Michelle must have gone through. What could have made her so desperate that hiding her baby was the only answer she could see? The library was small and quiet, mostly empty on a Thursday afternoon. Sarah spotted Michelle immediately. She was sitting at a table in the back corner, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater despite the warm weather. She looked younger than Sarah had expected, maybe late 20s, and there was something fragile about her, like she might bolt at any moment. Their eyes met across the library, and Sarah saw Michelle's fill with tears. She walked over slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Michelle?" she said softly. The woman nodded, unable to speak. Sarah sat down across from her and pulled out her phone. Without saying anything, she showed Michelle a photo of Emma, taken just that morning. Emma was smiling, her whole face lit up with joy. Michelle made a sound, half sob, half gasp. Her hand reached toward the phone but stopped just short of touching it. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Is she healthy, happy?" "She's perfect," Sarah said, her own voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect. And she's safe." Michelle closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. When she opened them again, there was a mixture of relief and pain so profound that Sarah felt it in her own chest. "I found the note," Sarah said gently. "In the blanket. That's why I'm here. I need to know what happened, Michelle. I need to know how to keep Emma safe." Michelle looked around the library nervously, as if expecting someone to appear. Then she leaned forward and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you everything." Michelle Torres had been working at Thornton Industries for 6 months when Richard Thornton first noticed her. She'd been so proud to land that job, a software engineer position at one of the most innovative tech companies in the country. Her parents had immigrated from Mexico with nothing, worked 2 jobs each to put her through college. Landing at Thornton Industries felt like proof that their sacrifices had meant something. She told Sarah all of this in that quiet library, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Sarah listened without interrupting, watching this young woman try to put into words an experience that had clearly broken something inside her. "He came to our department for a presentation," Michelle said. "Afterward, he stopped by my desk, asked about a project I was working on. I was flattered. Richard Thornton talking to me. He remembered my name, seemed genuinely interested in my ideas." She laughed bitterly. "I was so naive." Over the next few weeks, Thornton had sought her out regularly. Coffee meetings to discuss her projects, invitations to smaller strategy sessions. He was charming, brilliant, made her feel like she was special, like she had potential beyond what anyone else saw. Michelle's coworkers had noticed, some envious, others warning her to be careful. She hadn't listened. "When did it change?" Sarah asked gently. "It was gradual," Michelle said. "The professional meetings became dinners. He started texting me outside of work hours. At first it felt exciting, like I was being given access to this incredible person's life. He talked about his marriage being over in everything but name. Said his wife understood they were just together for appearances. Classic lines, right? But he made me believe them. The relationship had lasted about 6 months. Looking back, Michelle could see all the warning signs she'd missed at the time. How he needed to know where she was all the time. How he got jealous if she mentioned spending time with friends. How he criticized her clothing choices, her hair, her weight. But he did it all so subtly, wrapped in what seemed like concern or affection. "When I got pregnant, I thought maybe it would be good news," Michelle said, her voice breaking. "I actually thought he might be happy. We'd talked about being together openly once he finalized his divorce. I believed him. But Thornton's reaction had been immediate and ice cold. He'd demanded she get an abortion, offered to pay for it, said it was the only solution. When Michelle said she needed time to think about it, he'd become someone she didn't recognize. The charm vanished, replaced by threats so casual and calculated they'd terrified her. He told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, Michelle said, that if I went through with the pregnancy, he would destroy me. Not physically, nothing he could be arrested for, but he said he had lawyers, resources, ways of making my life impossible. He said no one would believe me over him, and even if they did, he could make sure I never worked in tech again. Sarah felt her hands clenching into fists under the table. She forced herself to stay calm to let Michelle continue. I didn't believe him at first. I thought I could reason with him, make him see that we could figure this out together. But that's when the harassment started. Michelle's voice had become flat, mechanical, as if she was reciting facts rather than her own experience. My work emails were hacked. Confidential files I'd been working on disappeared from the company servers, and suddenly I was being blamed for security breaches. False performance reviews appeared in my file saying I was unreliable, made errors, couldn't be trusted with sensitive projects. She'd been followed too. Men in dark cars that would park outside her apartment, never doing anything overtly threatening but always there, always watching. Her phone started acting strangely, calls dropping, strange notifications. Her therapist later told her these were classic intimidation tactics, designed to make her feel paranoid and afraid without leaving evidence. I tried to fight back at first, Michelle said. I went to HR, tried to report what was happening, but Thornton had already laid the groundwork. They had all these documented concerns about my performance. They suggested I was stressed, maybe needed to take some time off. One woman in HR even pulled me aside and told me, off the record, to just take the severance package they were offering and move on. She said I couldn't win against someone like him. Michelle had held out for 3 months trying to work while dealing with the pregnancy and the escalating pressure. Then one night she'd gotten a message from an unknown number. Just a photo, but it had shattered any remaining fight she had. It was a picture of her parents' home taken from across the street. That's when I knew I had to disappear, Michelle said, finally meeting Sarah's eyes. Not just leave the job, but actually disappear. Because he wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was showing me he could get to the people I loved. She'd used her savings to pay a lawyer to help her understand her options. The lawyer had been honest. Fighting someone with Thornton's resources would be financially and emotionally devastating, and the chances of winning were minimal. But he'd helped her in other ways. Helped her structure a resignation that included a small settlement and an NDA. Helped her plan her exit carefully. The pregnancy was the only thing I kept hidden from him, Michelle said. I wore loose clothes, worked remotely as much as possible in those last months. I told my family and close friends that I was moving for a job opportunity. Only my sister knew the truth. The birth had been lonely and terrifying. Michelle had gone to a hospital in another state, used her savings to pay cash, made sure everything was documented under her name so there was no confusion about parental rights. And all through labor, all through those first hours holding her daughter, she'd known she couldn't keep her. It wasn't that I didn't want her, Michelle said, crying openly now. I wanted her so much it hurt, but I knew that as long as she was with me, she wasn't safe. He had too many ways to find us, too many resources. And if he ever discovered she existed, I didn't know what he might do. Take her from me legally? Use her as leverage? I couldn't risk it. Sarah reached across the table and took Michelle's hand. The adoption, she said softly. How did you arrange it? My sister's best friend works at an adoption agency. She helped me do it quietly, quickly. I chose your profile because you seemed strong, stable, kind. You were a nurse, which meant you knew how to take care of people. And you were single, which meant there was less chance of complications, less chance of Thornton's people finding you if they ever looked. The donation to the agency? Michelle nodded. My grandmother died and left me some money. I used it to help expedite the process. I needed to know my daughter was somewhere safe before Thornton's people figured out where I'd gone. And the note? Sarah asked. I knitted that blanket during the pregnancy. It was the only thing I made for her, the only thing I could give her that came from me. I sewed the note in at the last minute, right before I handed her over. Michelle's voice cracked. I needed someone to know. I needed someone to understand that if anything ever happened, if he ever found out about her, there was a reason to protect her. I'm so sorry I put that burden on you. But I didn't know what else to do. Sarah squeezed her hand. You did the right thing. That note meant I took this seriously. It meant I looked into who he really is. They talked for another hour. Michelle shared more details about the other women she'd heard whispers about. Patterns she'd noticed even before her own experience. She gave Sarah copies of documents she'd kept hidden, evidence of her employment and the harassment, though nothing that directly implicated Thornton in ways that would hold up legally. He'd been too careful for that. What will you do now? Michelle asked as they prepared to leave. With this information? Sarah thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully at home with her grandmother. She thought about Michelle, living under an assumed name, too afraid to even acknowledge her own daughter. She thought about the other women, silenced and scattered, living with their own trauma. I don't know yet, Sarah admitted. But I know I can't do nothing. Emma deserves to grow up without this hanging over her, and you deserve to not live in fear anymore. He's too powerful, Michelle said quietly. I've accepted that. I just want my daughter to be safe even if I can't be part of her life. What if there was a way to change that? Sarah asked. What if there was a way to stop him from doing this to anyone else? Michelle looked at her with something that might have been hope or might have been fear. How? I don't know yet, but I have a friend who's been investigating him. And if there are other women willing to come forward, if we can build a case that's bigger than any one person's story, maybe we have a chance. They exchanged contact information before parting ways. As Sarah drove home, she called Marcus and told him everything Michelle had shared. He listened carefully, asking occasional questions. This is bigger than we thought, he said finally. If Michelle's experience is part of a pattern, there could be a dozen or more women out there with similar stories. Can we find them? Sarah asked. Maybe. But Sarah, you need to understand what you'd be starting here. Going after someone like Thornton, even with multiple witnesses, it's going to be brutal. He has lawyers, PR firms, ways of discrediting people that we can't even imagine. Are you sure you want Emma's life to include this kind of scrutiny? Sarah thought about the question seriously. She thought about the easy path, the safe path, where she just protected Emma from a distance and let the past stay buried. But then she thought about Michelle's face when she saw Emma's photo. She thought about the other women, living with their secrets and their fear. Emma deserves to know the truth about where she came from, Sarah said. And she deserves to grow up in a world where powerful people can't just hurt others and get away with it. I want her to learn that standing up for what's right matters even when it's hard. All right then, Marcus said. Let's see what we can build. The investigation that followed was painstaking and often heartbreaking. Marcus used his contacts to reach out to former Thornton Industries employees, looking for patterns and connections. Sarah, meanwhile, stayed in touch with Michelle, who slowly began to trust that maybe, just maybe, they could do something with the truth she'd been carrying. Emma turned 3 months old, then 4. Sarah tried to maintain normal life as much as possible, but everything had changed. She was acutely aware of her surroundings now, always checking to see if she was being followed, careful about what she posted on social media about Emma. She'd installed a security system in her house and started parking in different spots when she ran errands. Marcus said she was probably being paranoid, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that eventually, Thornton would find out someone was asking questions. Marcus made a breakthrough in week 6 of his investigation. He found a woman named Jennifer Park, the same one who'd spoken to him briefly before. This time, with Michelle's story as evidence that she wasn't alone, Jennifer agreed to meet. She brought documentation, emails that she'd secretly copied before signing her NDA, evidence of the harassment she'd endured after ending her relationship with Thornton. I've been carrying this for 3 years, Jennifer told them, sitting in Marcus's office with her lawyer present. 3 years of wondering if I should have fought harder, if I could have stopped him from doing this to someone else. When you told me about Michelle, about the baby, I realized my silence might have cost someone everything. Her story was eerily similar to Michelle's. The charm offensive, the gradual isolation, the transformation when she tried to end things. Jennifer hadn't gotten pregnant, but she'd experienced the same escalating harassment, the same calculated destruction of her professional reputation. She'd taken a settlement that barely covered her therapy bills and moved across the country to start over. He has a type, Jennifer said bitterly. Young women early in their careers, ambitious. He makes you feel special, like you're different from everyone else, and then when you're not useful anymore, or when you try to leave, you become the enemy. Marcus found 2 more women over the next month. Both had worked for companies Thornton had invested in. Both had similar experiences. Both had signed NDAs and taken settlements. One of them, a woman named Alicia, had almost no documentation because Thornton's lawyers had been so thorough. But she had her testimony, and she had medical records from the emergency room visit after a panic attack so severe she thought she was having a heart attack. "He never touched me," Alicia said quietly. "He was too smart for that. But he found ways to make me feel like I was losing my mind. Gaslighting, my therapist called it. Making me question my own reality, my own worth. By the time I left that company, I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore." Sarah listened to each woman's story with a growing sense of rage and determination. These were educated, accomplished, capable women who had been systematically broken down by someone with more power and resources than they could fight alone. But together, maybe they had a chance. The question was what to do with all this information. Marcus suggested they compile everything and take it to law enforcement, but his contacts in the legal world were skeptical. NDAs made everything complicated, and Thornton's lawyers would argue that these were simply disgruntled former employees trying to extort money from a wealthy man. Without physical evidence or criminal charges, it would be their word against his. "What about the media?" Sarah asked during one of their strategy sessions. "If we can't get him legally, what about public pressure?" Marcus looked thoughtful. "That's risky. We'd need a journalist willing to take on a story like this, someone with the backing of a major publication. And we'd need the women to be willing to go on record, which means violating their NDAs and potentially facing legal retaliation." They spent weeks debating the options. Sarah had long conversations with Michelle, who was terrified of going public but also exhausted from living in hiding. Jennifer was ready to fight, but her lawyer warned her that breaking the NDA could cost her everything she'd rebuilt. The other women were somewhere in between, torn between wanting justice and needing to protect themselves. It was Emma who ultimately helped Sarah make the decision. One evening, Sarah was holding her daughter singing a lullaby before bed when Emma looked up at her with those serious eyes and smiled. Not just any smile, but a full, joyful, trusting smile that said she felt safe in her mother's arms. Sarah realized in that moment that safety wasn't just about protecting Emma from immediate danger. It was about raising her in a world where truth mattered, where powerful people couldn't abuse others without consequences. What kind of example would she be setting if she had the evidence to stop a predator and chose silence instead? She called Marcus the next morning. "Let's find a journalist. Someone with integrity, someone who will tell this story right. And let's ask the women if they're willing to take the risk." Marcus had a contact at a major national publication, an investigative journalist named David Chen who'd built his career on exposing corruption and abuse of power. Marcus reached out carefully, providing just enough information to pique his interest without revealing the women's identities. David was interested, very interested. He'd actually been collecting information about Thornton for over a year, following leads about workplace misconduct and suspicious settlements. But he'd never had anyone willing to go on record. If Marcus could deliver testimony from multiple women with documentation, David thought his editors would run the story. The next phase was the hardest. Sarah, Marcus, and David met with each woman individually, explaining what going public would mean. There would be media scrutiny, social media harassment, possibly legal challenges from Thornton's team. Their lives would change permanently and unpredictably, but their stories told together could finally reveal the pattern of behavior that Thornton had hidden so successfully. One by one, the women agreed. Jennifer first, because she'd been ready to fight for years. Then Michelle, who said she was tired of being afraid and wanted Emma to grow up knowing her mother had been brave when it mattered. Then the others, each finding their own reasons to speak up despite the risk. David spent 6 weeks verifying every detail, interviewing the women multiple times, tracking down corroborating evidence. He spoke with other former employees who couldn't go on record but confirmed the stories. He obtained documents through legal means, building a case that was ironclad enough to get past Thornton's lawyers. During all of this, Sarah's life continued in strange parallel tracks. She was Emma's mother, going to pediatrician appointments and baby music classes, learning to puree vegetables and celebrating each new milestone. But she was also part of something bigger, a movement toward accountability that felt both terrifying and necessary. Her mother knew something was happening but didn't know the details. Rachel asked pointed questions that Sarah deflected. Only Marcus and Michelle knew the full scope of what they were building, and the weight of that secret felt heavier every day. The article was scheduled to publish on a Tuesday in October. David called Sarah the night before to give her a heads up. "It's going to be intense," he warned. "Thornton's PR team will attack immediately. The women need to be prepared for that. And Sarah, you need to be prepared too. Once this is public, if Thornton finds out about Emma, things could get complicated." "I know," Sarah said, looking at Emma sleeping in her crib. "But we're doing the right thing." "Yes," David agreed. "You are. I just want you to know what's coming." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept getting up to check on Emma, to make sure she was breathing, to touch her soft hair and remind herself why this mattered. She thought about Michelle, probably awake too, preparing to have her story become public knowledge. She thought about the other women, each dealing with their own fears and hopes about the morning. The article went live at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Sarah had been awake for hours, refreshing the publication's website every few minutes. When it finally appeared, she read through it with tears streaming down her face. David had done beautiful work. He'd told each woman's story with respect and detail, showing the patterns while honoring their individual experiences. He'd included the documentation, the evidence, the corroboration from other sources. He'd presented Thornton's denials and his lawyer's responses fairly, but had also made clear that the weight of evidence suggested a pattern of predatory behavior and abuse of power. The story mentioned Emma, though not by name. It explained that one woman had become pregnant and had given up her child for adoption, fearing for the baby's safety. That detail hit Sarah hard, seeing Michelle's sacrifice laid out in black and white for the world to read. Within an hour, the article had exploded across social media. News outlets were picking it up, commenting on it, analyzing it. Thornton's name was trending on multiple platforms. The stock price of his companies began to drop, and then, as predicted, the counterattack began. Part 5, Thornton's response was swift and orchestrated. Within hours of the article's publication, his lawyers released a statement calling the allegations false and defamatory, claiming the women were coordinating to extort money from a successful businessman. His PR team flooded media outlets with talking points about his charitable work, his family values, his decades of ethical business practices. Social media became a battlefield. Some people immediately believed the women and called for Thornton to face consequences. Others defended him viciously, claiming the women were liars seeking attention or money. The worst part was watching strangers dissect the lives and choices of women they'd never met, judging them for staying silent, for speaking up, for their career choices, their relationship choices, every decision they'd ever made. Sarah watched it all unfold from her living room, Emma playing on a blanket at her feet. She felt helpless and furious, wanting to defend the women, but knowing she had to stay out of the spotlight for Emma's sake. Marcus called hourly with updates. David checked in to make sure she was okay. Michelle texted that she was safe but scared. Then, 48 hours after the article published, something shifted. More women started coming forward. Women who hadn't been part of the original investigation, but who recognized themselves in the stories being told. Not all of them had worked directly for Thornton. Some had encountered him at industry events, others through business partnerships. But they all had stories about inappropriate behavior, about feeling unsafe, about being pushed out of opportunities when they rejected his advances. Within a week, the count had reached 12 women. Each story added weight to the pattern. Thornton's defenders began to sound less confident. His board of directors released a statement saying they were taking the allegations seriously and launching an internal investigation. The media cycle was relentless. Every day brought new developments, new analysis, new people weighing in. Sarah tried to shield Emma from all of it, maintaining their routines, but it was impossible to pretend everything was normal. She jumped every time the doorbell rang, worried that reporters had found her address, or worse, that Thornton's lawyers had. Marcus assured her she'd done nothing wrong legally. She wasn't named in the article, and her adoption of Emma was completely legitimate. But Sarah knew that being legally protected didn't mean she was safe from harassment or scrutiny if Thornton decided to come after her. On day 10 after publication, Thornton's board forced him to step down as CEO. The announcement came through a terse press release citing the need to address the concerns raised by recent allegations. Thornton himself released a statement maintaining his innocence but saying he didn't want to be a distraction to the important work of his companies. Sarah watched the news conference with Michelle on video chat. They didn't speak, just watched together as the man who'd terrorized them both was publicly stripped of his power. Michelle was crying. So was Sarah. It wasn't exactly victory, not in the way justice should feel, but it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was consequence. The legal investigations took months. 3 different law enforcement agencies opened inquiries into Thornton's conduct, examining potential violations of workplace safety laws, possible criminal harassment, and the validity of the NDAs that had silenced his victims. Federal prosecutors got involved when evidence suggested he'd used company resources to surveil former employees across state lines. Sarah followed the developments, but tried to focus on Emma, who was growing and changing every day. She was sitting up now, reaching for toys, babbling in that baby language that sounded almost like real conversation. Sarah documented every milestone with photos and videos, wanting Emma to know how loved she'd been from the very beginning. Michelle came to visit when Emma was 7 months old. It was a fraught, beautiful, complicated meeting. Sarah had offered multiple times, but Michelle had needed time to prepare herself emotionally. When she finally held Emma, both women cried so hard they could barely see. "She has my mother's eyes," Michelle whispered, studying Emma's face, "and your smile." They spent the weekend together, Michelle staying in Sarah's guest room, all 3 of them navigating what this relationship would look like. They agreed it would be an open adoption going forward, with Michelle gradually becoming part of Emma's life. It would be complicated, would require therapy and patience and lots of communication, but they both wanted it. "I want her to know you loved her enough to keep her safe," Sarah told Michelle. "I want her to understand that what you did was the hardest, bravest thing a mother could do." Michelle held Emma close, breathing in her baby smell. "I want her to know you too. I want her to know that you fought for her, even when you didn't have to. That you could have just kept quiet and kept her safe in your own way, but you chose to stand up instead." The criminal case against Thornton took 2 years to build. In the end, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts of harassment and stalking in exchange for the more serious charges being dropped. He received probation, substantial fines, and was required to liquidate many of his business holdings. More importantly, the NDAs were declared invalid due to the circumstances under which they'd been signed, freeing the women to speak without legal repercussion. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to show that even powerful people faced consequences. Enough to give other victims hope that their stories mattered. Enough to let the women who'd come forward begin to heal. Sarah watched Emma grow into a curious, joyful toddler who loved books and music and had an uncanny ability to make everyone around her smile. Michelle visited regularly, and Emma learned to call her Tia Michelle, not yet old enough to understand the full story, but knowing that this was someone important who loved her very much. On Emma's 3rd birthday, Sarah, Michelle, and all the women who'd come forward gathered for a small celebration. They'd become a support group of sorts, bonded by their shared experience and their collective courage. They watched Emma blow out her candles and cheered when she clapped her sticky hands together in delight. Later, after the party, Sarah showed Michelle the blanket. She'd kept it safe all this time, had it carefully preserved. The note was still tucked inside, though Sarah had also made copies that she kept in a safe deposit box. "Someday when she's old enough, I want to show her this," Sarah said. "I want her to understand what you did for her." "What we both did," Michelle corrected gently. "You could have just accepted the adoption and never looked deeper. You could have kept her safe by keeping her ignorant. But you didn't. You chose to find the truth even though it was dangerous. Emma's going to grow up knowing that's what you do when someone's in trouble. You don't look away." Sarah thought about that note often in the years that followed. "Please protect her," it had said. And she had, though not in the way either she or Michelle had initially imagined. Protection hadn't meant hiding or staying silent. It had meant shining light on the darkness, standing up to power, and teaching Emma through example that the truth mattered more than comfort. Emma grew into a remarkable child who loved fiercely and stood up for friends who were being treated unfairly on the playground. She asked questions constantly, wanting to understand why things were the way they were and how they could be better. Sarah and Michelle both saw themselves in her, but they also saw something new, A child who'd been born into difficult circumstances but who would grow up knowing she came from strength, from courage, from love that refused to be silenced. On Emma's 10th birthday, Sarah finally told her the full story. Not all the details, not everything that had happened, but enough for her to understand where she came from and what it had taken to keep her safe. Emma listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and then hugged both Sarah and Michelle tightly. "You were both my mom," she said simply. "One of you gave me life and one of you gave me a home, and you both fought for me." The note remained in its safe place, a reminder of a desperate woman's plea that had changed everything. Sarah had protected Emma just as that note had asked. But more than that, she'd helped create a world where Emma could grow up knowing that standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it. Years later, when Emma was preparing to go to college, she asked to see the blanket one final time before it was donated to an organization supporting domestic abuse survivors. She held it gently, traced the stitches her birth mother had made while pregnant and afraid. "I'm glad you found the note," Emma said to Sarah. "I'm glad you didn't just ignore it." "Me too," Sarah replied, her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Me too." The note had been a warning, a plea, a final act of maternal protection, but in the end it had become something more. Proof that even in our darkest moments when we feel most powerless, the simple act of speaking the truth can change everything. Michelle had sewn those words into her daughter's blanket hoping someone would listen. Sarah had listened, had acted, had refused to let fear win. And because of that, Emma had grown up safe, loved, and whole, knowing that she came from women who'd been brave when bravery was the hardest thing in the world. That was the real secret the note had revealed. Not just the darkness of one powerful man, but the incredible strength of ordinary people who chose to stand against it. The blanket was donated, but its story lived on. The women who'd found their voices, the lives that had been changed, the little girl who'd been protected and loved and given the chance to grow into everything she was meant to be. That was the true legacy of the note in the baby's blanket, and it was a legacy worth every difficult step it had taken to achieve.